This story is dedicated to every child who has been separated from their family, and to every adult who works to bring them home. While the psychic elements of this tale are fiction, the reality of child trafficking, governmental abuse, and family separation is tragically real. Organizations around the world work tirelessly to reunite families and protect children. Their work is the true miracle that inspired this story. The storm had been raging for 3 days when Sarah Brooks finally went into labor. Lightning split the October sky as Thomas drove their beat-up truck through the flooding streets of Millbrook, Oregon, racing toward the only hospital within 50 miles. "Hold on, Sarah," he said, gripping the steering wheel. "We're almost there." Sarah gasped as another contraction hit. At 34, this pregnancy had been harder than she'd expected. The doctor had warned them about complications with twins, but they'd prayed everything would be okay. Millbrook General Hospital was small and understaffed, especially during the storm. Half the power was out and they were running on generators. Dr. Patterson, the only obstetrician on duty, looked exhausted when Thomas wheeled Sarah into the delivery room. "Let's get these babies born safely," Dr. Patterson said, scrubbing his hands. What nobody knew was that Charles Sterling had been watching the hospital's birth records for months. His wife Evelyn had suffered 3 miscarriages in 5 years, and the doctors had told them she couldn't get pregnant again. Charles had money, more money than most people could imagine, but he couldn't buy the one thing his wife desperately needed. Dr. Marcus Webb had gambling debts. Serious ones. The kind that got people hurt if they weren't paid quickly. When Charles Sterling approached him with $50,000 and a desperate plan, Webb saw a way out of his problems. "It happens sometimes with twins," Webb told Charles as they sat in the hospital's dark administrative office. "One baby doesn't make it. Tragic, but these things happen." Charles looked at the ultrasound images Webb had shown him. 2 healthy baby girls. "My wife won't survive another loss. But that baby could have everything with us. The best life possible. What about the family? They'll grieve and move on. People are resilient. But my wife, she's fragile. This could save her life." At 11:43 p.m. on October 15, 2001, the first baby girl came into the world screaming with healthy lungs. Thomas cried as he heard his daughter's first cry. "One more coming," Dr. Patterson announced. "I can see the head." At 11:47 p.m., the second baby was born. She was smaller than her sister, quieter but perfectly healthy. Both babies had the same dark hair, the same tiny fingers, the same small birthmark on their left wrist. "2 beautiful girls," Dr. Patterson said, cleaning the babies. "Identical twins." Sarah was exhausted but glowing. "The first one is Lena," she whispered. "And the second one, Emma." But Dr. Webb was already moving. While Dr. Patterson was busy with Sarah's recovery, Webb took baby Emma to the nursery. Within an hour, he'd filled out a death certificate and made a phone call. Charles Sterling arrived at the hospital's back entrance at 3 a.m., when the storm was at its worst and the staff was dealing with power outages. No one saw him carry the baby carrier to his car. No one watched him drive away with Thomas and Sarah Brooks's daughter. By morning, the Brooks family was mourning a baby they believed had died in her sleep. They held Lena close and wept for Emma, never knowing she was alive and being renamed Sophia Sterling in a mansion 3 states away. Dr. Webb paid his gambling debts and bought a new car. Charles Sterling watched his wife hold their daughter for the first time and saw her smile for the first time in years. And in a small house in Millbrook, the Brooks family buried an empty coffin and tried to heal from a loss that would haunt them forever. 23 years later, Manhattan, New York. Sophia Sterling stood on the balcony of her penthouse apartment, looking out over Central Park. At 23, she had everything a person could want: a trust fund worth millions, a corner office at Sterling Pharmaceuticals, designer clothes, and invitations to every important social event in the city. But as she watched the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold, she felt the same emptiness that had followed her since childhood. It was like having a constant headache that no medicine could cure, a persistent ache in her chest that she couldn't explain or ignore. "Miss Sterling?" Her housekeeper, Mrs. Chin, knocked softly on the sliding door. "Your car will be here in 30 minutes. "Thank you, Mrs. Chin." Sophia rubbed the small scar on her left wrist, a habit she'd had since childhood. Her parents had told her it was from the delivery, twin complications, they'd said, though she'd never understood what that meant. The dreams had been worse lately. Every night, she dreamed of a shadowy figure who felt familiar, like family, but always stayed just out of reach. She'd wake up with tears on her cheeks and an overwhelming sense of loss. Her therapist, Dr. Martinez, called it existential loneliness. Rich people problems, some would say. But Sophia knew it was more than that. It felt like part of her soul was missing. 3,000 miles away, Lena Brooks was finishing her shift at Murphy's Diner. She'd been working since 4 a.m. serving coffee and eggs to truckers and early commuters. At 23, she'd already worked more jobs than most people twice her age. "Thanks, Lena," said Bill Murphy, the owner, as she hung up her apron. "Same time tomorrow?" "Wouldn't miss it," Lena said, counting her tips. $42. Not bad for a Tuesday morning. Combined with her evening shift at the grocery store, it would be enough for her mother's heart medication and maybe some groceries. As she walked home through Millbrook's quiet streets, Lena absently rubbed the scar on her left wrist. She'd had it since birth, though she'd never gotten a straight answer from her parents about how it happened. The Brooks family lived in a small 2-bedroom house on the edge of town. Paint was peeling from the siding and the front steps needed repair, but it was home. Inside, she found her father Thomas reading the newspaper in his wheelchair. He'd lost his left leg in a mill accident 5 years ago, and work had been hard to find since then. "Morning, Dad," she said, kissing his forehead. "How are you feeling?" "Better now that you're home safe," he said. Thomas worried about his daughter working so many hours, but they needed the money. Lena was the strongest person he knew, stronger than she should have to be at 23. "Any good dreams last night?" her mother Sarah asked as Lena poured herself coffee. Lena shook her head. The dreams were always the same, a shadowy figure who felt like home but always stayed just out of reach. She'd had them as long as she could remember. "You know," Sarah said gently, "I think those dreams are about your sister. The one we lost." Lena had heard the story countless times. How she'd had a twin sister who died shortly after birth. How they'd planned to name her Emma. How the doctor said it sometimes happened with twins. But something about the story had never felt complete. The dreams didn't feel like grief for someone dead, they felt like longing for someone alive but unreachable. "Maybe," Lena said, not wanting to upset her mother. Sarah still got tears in her eyes whenever she talked about the daughter they'd lost. But deep down, Lena had always felt like her twin sister wasn't dead. It was impossible, crazy even, but the feeling never went away. Somewhere in the world, someone who shared her face, her blood, her soul was alive and searching for her too. Sophia's assistant Margaret knocked on her office door at Sterling Pharmaceuticals. "Miss Sterling? Your father wants to see you in the conference room." Sophia found Charles Sterling studying financial reports with several board members. At 58, her father was still handsome in a silver-haired, distinguished way, but she'd always sensed something guarded about him. "Sophia, perfect timing," he said. "We're discussing the Foundation's new rural healthcare initiative." The Sterling Foundation was Sophia's pet project, one of the few things that made her feel useful. While most rich families threw money at problems from a distance, Sophia wanted to actually help people directly. "I want to personally oversee the pilot program," she announced. The board members looked surprised. "That's not necessary," said Richard Hayes, the Foundation's director. "We can send a team to handle implementation." "I'm not just sending money," Sophia said firmly. "I'm going myself." "Where exactly?" Charles asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew. Sophia pulled up a map on her tablet. "A town called Millbrook, Oregon. Small community, limited healthcare access, perfect for our mobile clinic program." Charles went very still. Why that particular town? Sophia couldn't explain the pull she felt toward this place she'd never seen. Looking at Millbrook on the map made her heart race with anticipation. "Because they need help and we can provide it." "I don't think," Charles started. "It's already decided," Sophia said with a finality that surprised everyone in the room. "I leave next week." After the meeting, Charles Sterling went to his private office and made a phone call he'd hoped he'd never have to make. "Victoria?" he said when the woman answered. "It's Charles Sterling. We have a problem." Lena was restocking gauze and bandages in the supply room at Millbrook Community Clinic when she heard the commotion outside. Through the small window, she watched a convoy of black SUVs pull into the parking lot, followed by a sleek silver Mercedes. "Must be the people from the Sterling Foundation," said Dr. Karen Walsh, the clinic's only full-time physician. "They're funding our new mobile unit." Rich people coming to look at the poor folks and feel good about themselves, Lena thought. She'd seen it before. Wealthy donors who showed up for photo ops and left without learning anyone's name. But when the woman emerged from the Mercedes, Lena dropped the box of supplies she was holding. It was like looking in a mirror 23 years later. The woman, clearly wealthy, judging by her tailored navy suit and confident posture, had the same dark hair, the same green eyes, even the same small dimple in her left cheek. She was Lena's height, had the same build, the same way of holding her shoulders. Lena stood frozen in the supply room doorway, watching this impossible duplicate of herself shake hands with Dr. Walsh and survey the clinic with intelligent eyes. When the woman absently rubbed a spot on her left wrist, the exact same spot where Lena's scar was, everything inside Lena went electric. Sophia felt it too. The moment she stepped out of the car, something in the air changed. It was like a tuning fork had been struck somewhere in her chest. When she saw the young woman in scrubs standing in the clinic doorway, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just similar features, it was like looking at herself in different clothes. The woman in scrubs had the same face, the same hair, even the same small scar on her left wrist that she was unconsciously rubbing. "Excuse me," Sophia heard herself saying, walking toward the woman as if pulled by an invisible string. Her assistants and security team looked confused, but she ignored them. "I'm sorry, but do we know each other?" Lena stepped forward, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. I don't think so. But..." She extended her left hand without thinking, and Sophia did the same. When their scars touched, both women gasped. It was like an electric shock but warm instead of painful. "That's not possible," Lena whispered. "What's your full name?" Sophia asked urgently. "Lena Brooks." "Yours?" "Sophia Sterling." Sophia's voice was barely audible. "When were you born?" "October 15, 2001. "You." "The same date." Sophia felt dizzy. "What time?" 11:43 p.m. "I was born at 11:47 p.m. Sophia sat down hard on a nearby bench. "For minutes after you." They stared at each other in stunned silence. Around them, the clinic staff watched in confusion as two identical women had what appeared to be an emotional breakdown. "We need to talk," Lena said. "Privately." They went to Murphy's Diner after the clinic closed, sitting in the back booth where Lena usually took her breaks. The resemblance was so striking that other customers kept staring, whispering to each other about the two identical women having an intense conversation. "Tell me about your family," Sophia said. Lena stirred sugar into her coffee with shaking hands. "My parents are Thomas and Sarah Brooks. My dad worked at the lumber mill until he was injured. My mom had twins, 2 daughters. But one of them died right after birth." "What was her name going to be?" "Emma." Lena's voice cracked. "They were going to name her Emma." Sophia closed her eyes. "My birth certificate says Emma Sterling was born at 11:47 p.m. on October 15, 2001. But my parents changed my name to Sophia when I was a baby." "That's impossible," Lena said. "My sister died. My parents saw the death certificate. They buried her." "Did they see her body?" Lena went very still. "No. The doctors said, they said it would be too traumatic. That it was better to remember her alive." "Lena, I think someone stole me from your family." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Because once they crossed it, everything they'd believed about their lives would change forever. "We need proof," Lena said finally. Sophia pulled out her phone. "I know someone who can help." Jake Miller had worked in Millbrook General Hospital's records department for 5 years. He was Lena's closest friend, the only person who'd ever believed her when she talked about feeling incomplete, like part of her was missing. "You want me to pull birth records from 2001? Jake asked when Lena called him. "That's not exactly legal, Lena." "Jake, please. I think my sister might be alive." There was a long pause. Jake had heard Lena talk about her dreams, her constant feeling that someone was missing from her life. "Give me until tomorrow night." Meanwhile, Sophia called her private investigator in New York. Marcus Reed had worked for the Sterling family for years, handling everything from background checks to corporate espionage. "I need you to research a doctor named Marcus Webb," Sophia told him. "He worked at Millbrook General Hospital in Oregon in 2001. I also need you to look into my adoption records. Miss Sterling, you weren't adopted. You were born to Charles and Evelyn Sterling. Just do the research, Marcus. And I need it fast." The next evening, Jake met them at the diner after midnight, when it was closed and empty. He spread papers across a table with shaking hands. "I found your birth records," he said to Lena. "Sarah and Thomas Brooks, twin daughters born October 15, 2001 at 11:43 p.m. and 11:47 p.m. He showed them a hospital form with handwritten notes. "But here's the death certificate for the second baby, signed by Dr. Marcus Webb." "Who was Dr. Marcus Webb?" Sophia asked. Jake looked uncomfortable. "He died 3 years ago. But there were always rumors about him. People said he took bribes, falsified records. Nothing was ever proven, but Sophia's phone rang. It was Marcus Reed calling from New York. "Miss Sterling, you're not going to like what I found," he said. "There are no legal adoption records for you. But I did find some interesting financial records. Your father made several large cash payments to Dr. Marcus Webb in 2001, and there's a life insurance policy on a baby named Emma Sterling who supposedly died shortly after birth." Sophia's hands shook as she hung up the phone. "We need a DNA test." But even as she said it, both women knew what the results would show. They could feel it in their bones, in the way their hearts beat in sync, in the way the constant ache of incompleteness had started to fade the moment they'd found each other. The DNA results came back 3 days later, though neither woman needed them for confirmation. They were identical twins, separated at birth and raised in completely different worlds. Lena insisted they tell her parents first. Thomas and Sarah Brooks deserved to know their daughter was alive before anyone else. "Mom, Dad," Lena said, sitting across from them in their small living room, "I need to tell you something, and it's going to be hard to believe." She'd brought Sophia with her, and both parents gasped when they saw the two identical women sitting side by side. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her hand going to her heart. "Oh my God, it's Emma." Thomas started crying, deep, silent sobs that shook his whole body. "How is this possible? We buried you. We mourned you for 23 years. Someone stole me," Sophia said gently. "A doctor at the hospital took me and gave me to another family. You buried an empty coffin." Sarah stood up on unsteady legs and walked to Sophia. With trembling hands, she touched her daughter's face. "You're real. You're alive. My baby is alive." For the first time in 23 years, Sophia felt like she was exactly where she belonged. These weren't strangers, they were her family. She could see herself in her father's eyes, her mother's smile. "I'm so sorry," Sophia whispered as Sarah pulled her into a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry you thought I was dead." "It's not your fault, baby," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "It's not your fault." Thomas wheeled his chair closer and took both his daughter's hands. "We need to know who did this. We need to know who stole our daughter and let us grieve for 23 years. The confrontation took place at the Sterling estate in the Hamptons. Sophia had insisted on it. If they were going to face the people who'd raised her with lies, it would be on her terms. The contrast was stark. Thomas and Sarah Brooks in their best clothes, which were still worn and simple, sitting in a living room that cost more than they'd make in a lifetime. Charles and Evelyn Sterling, impeccably dressed and surrounded by luxury built on theft. "How could you?" Sarah asked Charles, her voice steady despite her tears. "How could you steal our baby and let us think she was dead?" Charles looked older than his 58 years, his face pale and drawn. "You have to understand, we were desperate. Evelyn couldn't have children and she was falling apart. So you decided to destroy our family instead?" Thomas said, his voice shaking with rage. Evelyn Sterling, now 55 and fragile-looking, clutched a tissue in her manicured hands. "We gave her everything. The best education, the best opportunities, a life of privilege. You gave her nothing that belonged to you." Sarah stood up, 23 years of suppressed grief erupting. "She was my daughter. My flesh and blood. We loved her," Charles said desperately. "We raised her, protected her, gave her everything she needed." "Accept the truth," Lena said quietly. "Accept her real family. Accept the sister who dreamed about her every night for 23 years. Sophia sat between both sets of parents, feeling torn apart all over again. "I don't know how to process this," she said finally. "I don't know how to reconcile the fact that my entire life has been built on theft and lies." She looked directly at Charles Sterling, the man she'd called father for 23 years. "You didn't just steal me from the Brooks family. You stole Lena from me. You made us both incomplete, and you let them grieve for a daughter who was alive and well and living 3 states away. We thought it was for the best," Evelyn started. "You thought it was best for you," Sophia interrupted. "You never thought about us. You never thought about the family you destroyed or the sister you separated me from." Charles Sterling had built a pharmaceutical empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He'd negotiated with world leaders, crushed competitors, and navigated complex corporate deals. But facing the two women sitting in front of him, the daughter he'd stolen and the daughter he'd left behind, he had no words. "We'll make this right," he said finally. "Whatever you want, however we can fix this." "You can't fix 23 years, Thomas said. "You can't give us back the birthdays we missed, the Christmases, the graduations. You can't undo the grief you put us through. But you can face justice," Lena added. You can admit what you did and accept the consequences. 2 weeks after the confrontation, while both families struggled to navigate their new reality, Sophia received a manila envelope at her New York office. There was no return address, just her name typed on expensive stationery. Inside were photographs, grainy black and white images that looked like they'd been taken with a telephoto lens. They showed Charles Sterling meeting with a man she didn't recognize, exchanging an envelope for what looked like papers. The timestamp on the photos showed October 2001. The letter that accompanied the photographs was typed on the same expensive paper. Miss Sterling. Your adoptive father's crime would destroy Sterling Pharmaceuticals if it became public. The stock price would collapse. Thousands of employees would lose their jobs. Your adoptive mother would face criminal charges as an accessory to kidnapping. However, I am prepared to keep this information confidential in exchange for a simple arrangement. You will marry my son, Marcus Webb Jr., within 6 months. This union will combine our pharmaceutical interests and ensure mutual prosperity. If you refuse this arrangement, or if you contact law enforcement about this correspondence, these documents will be delivered to every major news outlet in the country within 24 hours. You have 48 hours to provide your answer. Sincerely, Victoria Webb *. Sophia stared at the letter, her blood turning to ice. Marcus Webb Jr. had been pursuing her romantically for months, showing up at charity events, sending flowers, asking her to dinner. She turned him down repeatedly because something about him made her skin crawl. She immediately called Lena. She thinks she can blackmail you into marriage? Lena said after reading the letter. This woman has no idea what she's dealing with. Lena, if this gets out, it will hurt innocent people. The employees at Sterling Pharmaceuticals didn't do anything wrong. And neither did you, Lena interrupted. You've spent your whole life trying to be worthy of love that should have been yours by right. When do you get to live for yourself? But my moth, Evelyn, could go to prison. And all those jobs are not your responsibility, Lena said firmly. The people who should be worried are the ones who committed the crimes. But Sophia had spent 23 years learning strategy from master manipulators. She wasn't going to choose between blackmail and exposure when she could create a third option. Sophia called Victoria Webb and agreed to meet for lunch at an expensive restaurant in Manhattan. But she came prepared, a digital recorder in her purse and Jake positioned outside with a telephoto lens camera. Victoria Webb was an elegant woman in her early 60s, with silver hair, expensive jewelry and cold blue eyes. She looked supremely confident as she sat across from Sophia in the restaurant's private dining room. I'm so glad you've come to your senses, Victoria said, cutting into her salmon. Marcus will make you a perfect husband. He's brilliant, ambitious, and he understands the pharmaceutical business. Before I agree to anything, Sophia said carefully, I'd like to understand your position better. How did you come by these photographs? Victoria smiled. My late husband was very thorough in his record keeping. He documented all of his consulting arrangements quite carefully. Including the arrangement with my father? Especially that one. Marcus was quite proud of how smoothly that particular transaction went. Your father was desperate, willing to pay any price. And the Brooks family? Well, they were easily convinced that their baby had died. Sophia felt sick, but she kept her expression neutral. What happened to Dr. Webb? Heart attack 3 years ago. Very sudden. But he left me well provided for through his various business ventures. Business ventures? Victoria's eyes gleamed. Marcus understood that certain types of research require flexible ethical standards. He specialized in studies that couldn't be conducted through official channels. What kind of studies? Psychological trauma responses. The effects of separation on identical siblings. The development of enhanced intuitive abilities in children who've experienced specific types of trauma. Victoria leaned forward. Your sister is particularly interesting in that regard. Sophia's blood ran cold. You've been watching Lena? Marcus documented both of you extensively. The girl, Lena, developed remarkable abilities after the separation. Precognition, enhanced empathy, almost supernatural intuition. My husband believed these abilities could be replicated and enhanced. Replicated how? Victoria smiled coldly. By creating more cases like yours. Separating twins, creating controlled trauma, studying the results. We've had quite a bit of success over the years. Sophia realized with growing horror that Victoria had just confessed to decades of crimes on tape. How many children? Oh, dozens. Maybe hundreds over the past 20 years. The research has been quite profitable. And now you want to use me to legitimize your son's company? Marcus Jr. has continued his father's work, but he needs the resources and respectability that Sterling Pharmaceuticals could provide. A marriage between our families would be perfect. Sophia reached into her purse and placed a tablet on the table, showing financial records and photographs. Mrs. Webb, my private investigator, is very thorough. Your husband left you well provided for through his consulting fees, but your son's company is hemorrhaging money. You need Sterling Pharmaceuticals more than we need your silence. Victoria's confident expression faltered. What are you talking about? Illegal drug trials in Southeast Asia. Stolen medical supplies meant for charity being sold on the black market. Children who've disappeared from foster care systems in 3 different states. Should I continue? The color drained from Victoria's face. You can't prove any of that. Sophia smiled, the same cold, calculating smile she'd learned from Charles Sterling. Mrs. Webb, I was raised by master manipulators. Did you really think I wouldn't learn their techniques? She stood up, leaving the tablet on the table. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to destroy those photographs and every other piece of evidence you have about my family. You're going to disappear from our lives completely. And if I ever see you or your son again, I'll destroy you. Victoria started to speak, but Sophia held up a hand. I have recordings of this conversation, photographs of your son's facilities, and financial records proving your involvement in human trafficking. One phone call from me and you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. As Sophia walked toward the door, Victoria threw one last desperate threat. You think you're so clever, but you don't know the whole truth. Your precious sister isn't the innocent victim you think she is. Ask her about the fire she started when she was 12. Ask her about the children who died because of her. Sophia felt ice in her veins, but she didn't turn around. She walked out of the restaurant knowing that Victoria Webb's last words were meant to destroy the bond between her and Lena. The question was, would they succeed? What fire? Sophia asked when she found Lena that evening. They were sitting in Lena's small living room, the space feeling cramped compared to Sophia's penthouse but infinitely more welcoming. Lena went pale. How does she know about that? Lena, what happened when you were 12? For the first time since they'd found each other, Lena pulled away from her sister. She stood up and walked to the window, hugging herself tightly. When I was 12, we lived in Portland, she said, not looking at Sophia. I was different. I could sense things before they happened. Bad things. I had dreams that came true, feelings that warned me when something terrible was about to happen. Sophia waited, afraid of what she was about to hear. My parents thought I was just a troubled kid dealing with the loss of my twin sister. They took me to therapists, put me on medication, tried everything. But the feelings kept getting stronger. Lena turned from the window, tears in her eyes. Then Dr. Webb started coming around. He said I was special, that I had gifts that needed to be studied and developed. My parents were desperate, Dad had been laid off and we were about to lose our house. Dr. Webb offered them money if they'd let me participate in his research program. What kind of research? He had a facility outside Portland. An old summer camp that he'd converted into a research center. I went there on weekends thinking it was like a special school for kids with abilities. Lena sat back down but she wouldn't meet Sophia's eyes. There were other children there. Kids who could do things that seemed impossible. Some could move objects with their minds. Others could see things that were happening far away. A few could speak to people who had died. What did Dr. Webb do to you? Test. Experiments. He was obsessed with understanding how I could predict things. But the more he studied me, the more convinced he became that my abilities came from trauma, specifically from being separated from my twin. Sophia felt sick. He knew about me. He'd always known. He kept detailed records about both of us, documenting how the separation had affected us differently. You became successful but empty, always searching for something you couldn't name. I developed psychic abilities but lived with constant pain from the missing connection. What about the fire? Lena finally looked at her sister, and Sophia saw years of guilt and pain in her eyes. I tried to escape. I was 14 by then and I'd figured out that what Dr. Webb was doing wasn't research, it was exploitation. He was selling information about us to government contractors, military researchers, people who wanted to weaponize psychic abilities. You were just a kid. I was old enough to know right from wrong. And I knew something terrible was going to happen that night. I could feel it building like a storm. So I tried to get the other children out. Lena's voice broke. The building was old. The wiring was faulty. I don't know if it was my ability somehow affecting the electrical systems, or if it was just an accident, but the whole place caught fire. How many children were there? 15. I managed to get 12 of them out before the building collapsed. But 3 children died in that fire, Sophia. 3 children who were there because of the same program that had brought me there. Sophia reached for her sister's hand, but Lena pulled away. Their names were Amy, David, and Michael. They were 8, 10, and 11 years old. They died because I couldn't save them all. Lena, you saved 12 children. You were 14 years old and you saved 12 lives. But I couldn't save them all, Lena whispered. And Dr. Webb covered it up. Claimed it was an electrical accident, paid off investigators, made sure no one looked too closely at what had really been happening there. That's when your family moved to Millbrook? Lena nodded. My parents finally believed me about the bad feelings, about the danger. We packed up and left Portland in the middle of the night. But I've lived with the guilt ever since. Those 3 children died because of research that only existed because of what I could do. Sophia finally understood why Lena had pulled away. You think this is your fault? You think that because you have abilities, you're responsible for what Dr. Webb did? Aren't I? No. Sophia's voice was firm. You were a child. A child who was exploited and traumatized by an adult who should have protected you. You didn't ask for abilities. You didn't ask to be separated from me. And you sure as hell didn't ask to be used as a lab rat by a man who cared more about money than children's lives. But if I hadn't been different, then Dr. Webb would have found other children to exploit. Men like that don't stop because one victim escapes. They find new victims. Sophia moved closer to her sister. Lena, you survived something horrific. You saved 12 children from dying in that fire. And now we have a chance to stop Victoria Webb from continuing her husband's work. What do you mean? She confessed to everything. Human trafficking, illegal research, exploiting separated siblings for decades. We have enough evidence to shut down her entire operation. For the first time since she'd started telling the story, Lena looked hopeful. We can stop them? We can stop them. But only if we work together. Sophia took her sister's hands. I need to know, do you still have the abilities? Lena hesitated. Some of them. They're stronger when you're near me. Like our connection amplifies whatever I can do. Then we use that. We use everything we have to make sure Victoria Webb and her son never hurt another child. Using the evidence Sophia had gathered and Lena's intuitive abilities to guide their investigation, the sisters began mapping out the full extent of Victoria Webb's operation. What they discovered was far worse than either had imagined. She's not just continuing her husband's research, Sophia said as they sat in her hotel room, surrounded by documents and photographs. She's expanded it. There are facilities in 7 different states. Lena closed her eyes, extending her consciousness the way Dr. Webb had taught her years ago, but now using the ability to help rather than harm. I can sense them, she whispered. Children. Dozens of them. They're scared, separated from their families. She opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Sophia, she's not just separating twins. She's taking siblings of all kinds, brothers, sisters, even adopted children who've bonded closely. She thinks any strong sibling connection can be weaponized. Where are they? The closest facility is in Northern California. An old boarding school. But there are others, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. Sophia pulled up a map on her laptop. Show me. As Lena pointed to locations, Sophia marked them. A pattern emerged. All the facilities were in remote areas, far from major cities, near places where children might disappear without drawing too much attention. Foster care systems, Sophia realized. She's targeting kids in the system. Children whose disappearances might be explained away as runaways. And families in crisis, Lena added. Parents who are desperate, struggling financially, who might believe their children are getting help when they're really being exploited. Sophia's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Reed, her private investigator. Found something you need to see. Victoria Webb has been receiving government funding through shell companies. This goes higher than we thought. The meeting took place in a secure location, a private room at the back of an old bookstore in Portland that Marcus Reed used for sensitive discussions. The investigator was a former FBI agent, gray-haired and serious, with the kind of face that had seen too much corruption. The funding comes from a black budget program, Marcus explained, showing them classified documents he'd obtained through sources Sophia didn't want to know about. Department of Defense contract, officially listed as Enhanced Human Performance Research. They're trying to create psychic soldiers, Lena said, the pieces clicking together in her mind. Worse than that, Marcus replied. They want to understand how to break and rebuild human consciousness. The separated siblings research is just one part of a larger program studying trauma-based psychological conditioning. Sophia studied the documents. How long has this been going on? The current iteration started about 15 years ago, but the roots go back decades. MKUltra, Project Stargate, various CIA experiments from the Cold War era. This is the modern evolution. And Victoria Webb is just a contractor? She's one of several. There are similar operations running in 12 countries that we know of. The U.S. program alone has processed over 1,000 subjects in the past decade. Lena went white. 1,000 children. Children, teenagers, some adults. Anyone who shows unusual psychological resilience or psychic potential. Marcus pulled out another file. But here's the thing. Most of the subjects don't develop the abilities the researchers want. The success rate is less than 5%. What happens to the ones who don't develop abilities? Sophia asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. Marcus's expression was grim. They're classified as non-responsive subjects and transferred to other programs. Some end up in psychiatric facilities. Others simply disappear from the records entirely. They're killing children, Lena whispered. Or worse. There's evidence of subjects being used for medical experimentation, organ harvesting, and being sold into various forms of trafficking. Sophia felt sick. Her adoptive father's pharmaceutical company had unknowingly helped fund this horror through legitimate-seeming research grants. Her own privileged life had been built on blood money. We have to stop them, she said. It's not that simple, Marcus warned. These people have resources, government protection, and they're willing to kill to protect their operation. If you go after them directly, you'll end up dead or disappeared. Then what do you suggest? Marcus smiled grimly. We expose everything at once. All the facilities, all the government connections, all the evidence. Make it too big to cover up and too public to ignore. How? We get inside one of their facilities, document everything, and rescue as many children as we can. Then we release all the evidence simultaneously to every major news outlet, law enforcement agency, and human rights organization in the world. Lena leaned forward. The California facility. I can sense it's the largest one and they're planning something big there soon. What kind of something? Sophia asked. Lena closed her eyes, extending her abilities. They have new subjects arriving tomorrow. Young children, some as young as 6 or 7. And there's something else. Her eyes snapped open. They know about us. Victoria Webb told them about our connection, and they want to study us too. We're walking into a trap, Marcus said. Maybe, Sophia replied. But it might be our only chance to save those children. The facility was located in the mountains of Northern California, disguised as a private treatment center for troubled youth. From the outside, it looked legitimate, well-maintained buildings, professional signage, even a website advertising therapeutic programs for at-risk children. But Lena could feel the darkness emanating from the place like a physical presence. How many children? Sophia asked as they surveyed the facility from a ridge overlooking the valley. Lena extended her consciousness, feeling for young minds inside the buildings. 23 that I can sense clearly. But there might be more in areas that are shielded somehow. Marcus checked his equipment. Cameras, recording devices, communication gear. The FBI team will be in position in 6 hours. You need to get inside, gather evidence, and get those kids to safety before then. Why can't we wait for the FBI? Sophia asked. Because Victoria Webb has connections inside the Bureau. If we follow official channels, the evidence will disappear and the children will be moved before anyone can stop it. Lena studied the facility's layout. There are guards, but not as many as you'd expect. They rely more on isolation and psychological control than physical security. Makes sense, Marcus said. Most of their subjects are children who've been told their families are dead or don't want them anymore. Where would they run to? The plan was simple in concept, dangerous in execution. Lena would use her abilities to avoid the guards and locate the children, while Sophia documented everything with hidden cameras. Marcus would coordinate from outside and signal the FBI when they had what they needed. They waited until 2 a.m. when the facility was at its quietest. Lena led the way, her enhanced senses allowing her to navigate the darkness and avoid the guards' patrol routes. The first building they entered looked like a normal dormitory from the outside. Inside it was a nightmare. Children were housed in small, windowless cells, each one isolated from the others. Many were hooked up to monitoring equipment that tracked their brain activity, heart rate, and other biological functions. The walls were covered with cameras and speakers that could be used to subject the children to various forms of psychological manipulation. "Dear God," Sophia whispered, documenting everything with her hidden cameras. They moved systematically through the building, finding child after child in various stages of the program. Some were recent arrivals still crying for their parents. Others had been there longer and stared at the ceiling with empty eyes. In one cell, they found a pair of 8-year-old twin boys who had been separated but kept in adjacent rooms. They could hear each other crying through the thin walls but couldn't touch or see each other. "We're getting you out of here," Lena whispered to them as she picked the lock on their cells. "Are you our new doctors?" one of the boys asked. "No, sweetheart. We're here to take you home." As they gathered more children, Lena realized the true scope of the horror. The facility wasn't just separating siblings, it was systematically traumatizing children in every way possible, trying to shatter their personalities and rebuild them as weapons. "They're creating multiple personalities," she told Sophia as they moved through the second building. "Breaking their minds and then programming the pieces." "How many buildings are there?" 3 main ones, plus a separate facility for the older subjects who've completed the program. In the third building they found the teenagers and young adults who had survived the process. These subjects were different, cold, emotionally flat, with an unsettling ability to anticipate their captors' needs and desires. "They're not just victims anymore," Sophia realized. "They've been turned into tools." "Stockholm Syndrome on steroids," Lena agreed. "They've been broken so completely that they identify with their captors." But in the basement of the third building they found something that changed everything. The basement level was different from the rest of the facility. Instead of cells there were laboratories. Instead of beds there were operating tables. Instead of the antiseptic smell of a medical facility, there was the metallic scent of blood. "Sophia," Lena whispered, grabbing her sister's arm. "We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. The lights came on, and they found themselves surrounded by armed guards led by a man in his 30s with cold blue eyes and a clinical smile. "Miss Sterling, Miss Brooks," he said. "My mother told me you might pay us a visit. I'm Dr. Marcus Webb Jr., and I'm very much looking forward to studying you both." The children they'd been trying to rescue were herded back to their cells by more guards. The twins were separated again, their brief hope of freedom crushed. "You see," Dr. Webb continued, walking between the operating tables like a professor giving a lecture, "my father's research was groundbreaking but limited by his primitive methods. I've refined the process considerably." He gestured to the equipment around them. "We don't just separate siblings anymore. We can enhance or suppress any aspect of human consciousness. Memory, emotion, empathy, pain tolerance, even basic survival instincts." "You're torturing children," Sophia said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'm improving them," Webb corrected. "These children came from broken homes, abusive families, failed foster placements. They had no future worth living. Now they can serve a higher purpose. By becoming weapons? By becoming whatever we need them to become. Soldiers, spies, assassins, researchers, anything that serves the greater good of national security." Lena had been quiet, but now she spoke up. "The children who don't develop the abilities you want, what happens to them?" Webb's smile turned cruel. "They provide other valuable services. Organ harvesting for our successful subjects who need transplants. Medical experimentation to improve our techniques. And of course, there's always a market for young, attractive subjects in certain industries." "You're selling children," Sophia realized with horror. "I'm maximizing resource utilization," Webb replied. "Every subject provides value in one form or another." He walked over to a wall covered with photographs, before and after pictures of hundreds of children who had passed through his programs. "Your case is particularly interesting," he said to the twins. "Identical genetics, shared trauma, but completely different developmental outcomes." Sophia became a high-functioning sociopath, brilliant but emotionally empty. Lena developed genuine psychic abilities but struggles with survivor guilt and emotional instability. "We're not your test subjects," Lena said. "Oh, but you are. You have been since the day you were born. My father's separation experiment was just the beginning. We've been monitoring both of you your entire lives, documenting how the trauma affected your development." He showed them a thick file. "Every relationship you've had, every job you've taken, every decision you've made, all of it has been influenced by psychological conditioning that began in infancy." "That's impossible," Sophia said. "Is it? Sophia, why do you think you were drawn to charitable work? Why do you think you chose to come to Millbrook specifically? Lena, why do you think you developed your abilities while other trauma victims don't? Why do you think you both felt incomplete until you found each other?" The horrible truth began to dawn on them. The dreams, Lena whispered. Induced through subliminal conditioning. The constant feeling of emptiness, the compulsive need to search for something undefined, all artificially created to ensure you would eventually find each other. Why? Sophia asked. Because we needed to study your reconnection. We needed to understand what happens when artificially separated subjects are reunited after decades of conditioning. Webb walked over to the operating tables. And now we can complete the experiment. We'll separate you again, but this time permanently. We'll study how your consciousness responds to losing the connection a second time. And then, when we've learned everything we can from your suffering, we'll put you to more practical use. But as Webb continued his clinical explanation of how he planned to destroy them, neither twin was really listening. They were feeling something else, a growing connection between them, stronger than anything they'd experienced before. The terror and rage of the moment was amplifying their bond, and with it, Lena's abilities were growing exponentially. You made one mistake, Lena said quietly, interrupting Webb's monologue. Oh? And what's that? You brought us together. The lights in the basement began to flicker. The electronic equipment started making strange humming noises. The guards looked around nervously as the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Fascinating, Webb said, pulling out a tablet to record readings. The emotional stress is amplifying your abilities beyond anything we've previously measured. But he'd misunderstood what was happening. This wasn't just Lena's abilities being enhanced. It was both twins tapping into something that had been dormant since their separation as infants. Sophia could suddenly see through Lena's eyes, could feel her thoughts as clearly as her own. And Lena could feel Sophia's strategic mind working, planning their escape with tactical precision. Moving in perfect synchronization, they attacked. Lena used her enhanced intuition to predict the guards' movements while Sophia's analytical mind calculated angles and trajectories. To the guards, it was like fighting a single opponent with 4 arms, 2 brains, and the ability to be in multiple places at once. The first guard went down when Lena ducked a punch she saw coming 3 seconds before it was thrown, while Sophia grabbed his weapon and used it to incapacitate the second guard. The electrical systems in the building were going haywire, responding to the energy the twins were generating. Emergency alarms started blaring, and the electronic locks on all the cells began opening automatically. Impossible, Webb muttered, still recording data even as his facility fell apart around him. The energy readings are off the charts. You're not just psychic, you're affecting reality itself. Get the children out. Sophia shouted to Lena as more guards poured into the basement. But they didn't need to coordinate their actions anymore. They could feel each other's intentions, respond to each other's needs without communication. While Sophia fought the guards with borrowed weapons and tactical thinking, Lena led the children to safety using knowledge that seemed to come from nowhere. The building's fire suppression system activated, flooding the basement with water and foam. The backup generators failed, plunging everything into darkness except for the emergency lighting. In the chaos, Webb tried to escape, but the twins moved to block him with the same perfect coordination they'd used to fight his guards. You don't understand what you're doing, he said desperately. This research is vital to national security. These children would have died on the streets or in abusive homes. We gave them purpose. You gave them trauma, Lena said, her voice echoing strangely in the flooded basement. You stole their childhoods, Sophia added, her words perfectly synchronized with her sister's. You turned love into a weapon, they said together, their voices blending into something that was more than the sum of its parts. Webb backed against the wall, his clinical detachment finally cracking. What are you? We're what happens when your experiment succeeds too well, Sophia said. We're what you created when you tried to break something that couldn't be broken, Lena added. We're justice, they said in unison. The twins didn't kill Webb, they didn't need to. As FBI agents finally stormed the facility, they found him in the flooded basement, catatonic with shock, clutching his tablet with readings that no one would ever be able to fully understand. The FBI raid on the California facility led to the discovery of 6 more locations across the western United States. Over 200 children were rescued, dozens of staff members were arrested, and the government contractors funding the program were exposed in congressional hearings that lasted for months. Victoria Webb was found dead in her Manhattan apartment 3 days after her son's arrest, an apparent suicide. She left behind detailed records of every child who had passed through their programs over the past 20 years, a final act that might have been conscience or simply spite. Charles Sterling cooperated fully with investigators and testified before Congress about the pharmaceutical industry's unwitting involvement in the funding. Sterling Pharmaceuticals was restructured under federal oversight, and its resources were redirected toward legitimate child welfare programs. Dr. Patterson, the obstetrician who had delivered the twins 23 years earlier, came forward with his own testimony about Dr. Webb's suspicious behavior. He'd always wondered about the babies who had died under Webb's care, but had never had the courage to speak up. "I should have said something sooner," he told Sophia and Lena when they met at the courthouse. "I failed those families and I failed you." "You were one person going up against a system," Sophia replied. "The important thing is that you're speaking up now." The twins' story became international news, sparking investigations into similar programs in 12 other countries. The UN launched a special commission on child trafficking and governmental abuse, with Lena serving as an expert witness on psychological trauma. But the most important changes were personal. Sophia moved permanently to Millbrook, buying a large house on the outskirts of town where both families could visit comfortably. The psychic connection between the twins had stabilized into something manageable. They could still feel each other's emotions and communicate without words when necessary, but they were no longer overwhelmed by the shared consciousness that had emerged during the rescue. "It's like having a phone line that's always open," Lena explained to Dr. Sarah Martinez, the trauma specialist they both worked with. "We can choose when to use it, but we always know the other person is there." The relationship between the Brooks and Sterling families remained complicated, but they were learning to navigate their new reality. Sarah Brooks and Evelyn Sterling found common ground in their shared love for the daughters they'd both raised, while Thomas Brooks and Charles Sterling worked together on the foundation's board of directors. "I can't forgive what you did," Thomas told Charles during one of their board meetings. "But I can see that you love her, and that matters." "I can't undo the past," Charles replied. "But I can spend the rest of my life trying to make amends." Sophia used her business skills and the resources she'd inherited to establish the Brooks Sterling Foundation, focusing on family reunification and support for children who'd been separated from their siblings. Lena's intuitive abilities made her an exceptional counselor for trauma survivors. But it was their work together that proved most effective. "They trust us in a way they can't trust anyone else," Lena explained to a reporter doing a feature story on their foundation. "When we tell a child that we understand what it feels like to lose a sibling, they believe us, because they can see that we've lived through it too. And when we tell families that reunification is possible, they believe us," Sophia added, "because they can see the proof standing right in front of them." The twins had helped reunite over 300 families in the 2 years since the Webb facilities were shut down. Children who had been told their siblings were dead discovered brothers and sisters who were alive and searching for them. Adults who had grown up believing they were only children found the siblings who had been stolen from them decades earlier. 3 years after their reunion, Sophia and Lena were invited to speak at the International Conference on Child Rights in Geneva. The auditorium was packed with delegates from 94 countries, all gathered to hear about new protocols for preventing child trafficking and governmental abuse. "People often ask us about the psychic abilities," Lena said from the podium, Sophia standing beside her. "They want to know if we can read minds or predict the future. The truth is simpler and more important than that. We can feel when someone is lying about loving a child," Sophia continued. "We can sense when an adult has ulterior motives. We can tell the difference between genuine care and manipulation. But you don't need psychic abilities to do that," they said together. "You just need to remember what it feels like to be a child who needs protection." The standing ovation lasted for 5 minutes. After their speech, they were approached by Dr. Elena Vasquez, a researcher from the University of Madrid who had been studying the long-term effects of sibling separation. "Your case has changed how we understand human bonding," she told them. "The connection you share suggests that consciousness itself might be more interconnected than we previously believed." "Have you found other cases like ours?" Lena asked. "Dozens. Siblings separated by war, adoption, trafficking, or governmental programs who maintain some form of psychic connection across distance and time. Your story has encouraged many of them to come forward." Dr. Vasquez showed them a map marked with pins representing confirmed cases of separated siblings with enhanced connections. "We're proposing a new field of study, connection psychology. Understanding how human consciousness maintains bonds even under extreme trauma. Will that help the children who are still out there?" Sophia asked. "It already has. Knowing that these connections exist has changed how we approach family reunification efforts. And it's led to new therapeutic techniques for helping separated children heal." As they looked at the map, covered with hundreds of pins representing separated families around the world, both twins felt the same sense of purpose that had driven them since their own reunion. On a warm October evening, exactly 5 years after their reunion, Sophia and Lena stood once again in the cemetery where they had once thought one of them was buried. But this time they weren't alone. Thomas and Sarah Brooks were there, along with Charles and Evelyn Sterling. Dr. Patterson had driven down from Portland. Marcus Reed, the private investigator who had helped expose the Webb conspiracy, had flown in from New York. Jake Miller, who had risked his job to help them find the truth, stood with his wife and new baby. And scattered around the cemetery were dozens of other people. Families they'd helped reunite, children they'd rescued, siblings who had found each other because of the Foundation's work. The memorial plaque they'd installed 5 years earlier had been joined by a larger monument, a granite sculpture of two children reaching for each other across an impossible divide, finally touching fingertips. The inscription read, "In memory of all the children separated from those they love, and in celebration of every family that finds its way home." "I keep thinking about what Victoria Webb said," Sophia told Lena as they stood before the monument. "About how our whole lives were manipulated, how even our reunion was planned." "Does it matter?" Lena replied. "Even if they influenced our choices, we still made them. Even if they created the circumstances, we still chose love over hate, healing over revenge. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never found each other?" Lena considered the question. "Sometimes. But then I think about all the families we've helped, all the children we've saved. If our suffering led to that, then maybe it was worth it." Sarah Brooks approached them, carrying a bouquet of white roses, the same flowers she'd brought to this cemetery every year for 23 years when she'd thought her daughter was dead. "I used to bring these for Emma," she said, placing them at the base of the monument. "Now I bring them for all the children who are still out there, waiting to come home." Charles Sterling joined them, looking older than his 63 years but more at peace than he'd been in decades. "I can't change what I did," he said to Sarah and Thomas. "But I can make sure it never happens to another family." Evelyn Sterling, now in her 60s and still fragile but no longer broken, took both twins' hands. "I know I'm not your real mother," she said to Lena. "But I love you like you're my own daughter." "You are my mother," Lena replied. "Just like Sarah is Sophia's mother. We have room in our hearts for all the people who love us." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the peaceful cemetery, the extended family, blood relations and chosen family, victims and survivors, the broken and the healed, stood together in comfortable silence. Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. "I have something to say," he announced. "Something I should have said years ago." Everyone turned to listen. "When I delivered those babies 23 years ago, I knew I was witnessing something special. Twins have a connection that goes beyond what most people understand. But what I saw that night..." He paused, gathering his courage. "I saw two souls who were meant to be together. And I've spent 23 years wondering if I failed them by not speaking up about Dr. Webb." "You couldn't have known," Thomas said. "Maybe not. But I can speak up now." Dr. Patterson pulled out an envelope. "I've written a detailed account of everything I remember about that night, everything I observed about Dr. Webb's behavior, and every suspicion I had but was too afraid to voice. It's going to the FBI, to Congress, and to every medical journal that will publish it." He looked directly at the twins. "Your story isn't just about you. It's about every child who's ever been separated from their family. And it's about every adult who has the power to protect children but chooses silence instead." Jake stepped forward with his wife and baby. "Emma and I named our daughter Hope," he said. "Hope Brooks Miller. Because your story taught us that no matter how dark things get, love always finds a way." As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Lena felt a familiar tingle of intuition. But this time it wasn't warning her about danger, it was telling her about possibility. "There's another one," she said quietly to Sophia. "Another what?" "Another pair like us. Twins who were separated, who are searching for each other. They're close. Maybe in California." Sophia smiled. "Then I guess we have work to do." 10 years later. The Brooks Sterling Foundation had become the world's leading organization for family reunification, with offices in 27 countries and a success rate that baffled statisticians. Over the past decade, they had helped reunite more than 2,000 families and had provided support services to tens of thousands more. Sophia Sterling Brooks stood in the foundation's new headquarters in Geneva, looking out over Lake Geneva as she reviewed the quarterly reports. At 33, she was considered one of the world's foremost experts on family trauma and recovery. "The numbers are incredible," said Dr. Maria Santos, the foundation's director of research. "Our success rate is still over 90%, which shouldn't be statistically possible." "It's not about statistics," Sophia replied. It's about understanding what love can accomplish when it refuses to give up. Down the hall, Lena was working with a group of children who had recently been rescued from a trafficking operation in Eastern Europe. Her abilities had continued to develop over the years, but she'd learned to use them in service of healing rather than just detection. "The bad people are gone," she told a 6-year-old girl who hadn't spoken since being rescued. "And we're going to help you find your brother." The little girl looked up with hope in her eyes, the same hope that had kept Sophia and Lena searching for each other for 23 years. That evening, as the sisters walked along the lake, they talked about their plans for the future. The foundation was opening new facilities in South America and Southeast Asia. There were government contracts to negotiate, training programs to develop, and always more families to help. "Do you ever miss the quiet life?" Sophia asked. "Never," Lena replied without hesitation. "This is what we were meant to do. All of it, the separation, the suffering, the reunion, even the horror of what we discovered, it all led us here. To saving other families. To proving that love really can overcome anything." They stopped at a bench overlooking the water, the same bench where they'd sat 3 years earlier when they'd made the decision to expand the foundation internationally. "I had the dream again last night," Lena said. "The shadow figure?" "No. A new dream. A good one." Lena smiled. "I dreamed about children who will never be separated from their families because of the work we're doing. I dreamed about siblings who will grow up together, safe and loved and whole." "How many children?" "Millions," Lena said. "Millions of children who will never know what it feels like to lose a brother or sister, because we changed the world enough to protect them." As the sun set over Lake Geneva, both women felt the same deep satisfaction they'd carried for the past 10 years. They'd turned their trauma into purpose, their pain into healing for others, their reunion into hope for thousands of separated families. The shadow twin was no longer a shadow. She stood in the light, with her sister beside her, doing the work they were born to do. And in hospitals around the world, new protocols ensured that no doctor could ever again be bribed to steal a child from their family. In government offices, new oversight prevented the kind of research programs that had torn so many siblings apart. In foster care systems, new rules prioritized keeping siblings together above all other considerations. The work wasn't finished, it might never be finished. But every day, somewhere in the world, a family was reunited because two sisters had refused to accept that love could be permanently broken. Every day, somewhere in the world, a shadow twin stepped into the light and found their way home. If you enjoy this story and will be looking forward to more engaging stories like this, stories about long-lost love, reconnection and crime expose. Do not forget to like this video and drop us a few words of encouragement in the comment section. We are a new channel and we are hoping that with your love and support we can grow exponentially within the next few weeks. And on this note we say, we will catch you on the next one.